Okay, welcome to the Alaska Landmine's first in a series of debates for the 6 Anchorage Assembly races. I'm Jeff Landfield, editor of the Alaska Landmine. Only 2 incumbents are seeking re-election, some members Daniel Volland and Cameron Perez-Verdilla. District 1 is one of the seats with an incumbent seeking re-election. Some member Daniel Volland is facing off against Daniel George. Perennial candidate Nick Danger is also running but did not respond to our invitation, and he also did not file any campaign finance reports. Ballots for the 6 Anchorage Assembly races, 2 school board races, and bond propositions went out in the mail this week. They are due back by April 1st. Before we start the debate, I would like to thank our sponsors. Got to thank the sponsors. GCI, providing lightning fast internet. The Sumner Company, Jesse Sumner, one of the Mat-Su Valley's premier home builders. The IBW Local 1547, training electricians all over the state of Alaska. Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, that's Brad Keithley. He's doing a weekly chart column on the Alaska Landmine. And Legislative Consultants of Alaska, that's lobbyists Wendy Chamberlain and Heather Brakes. Really want to thank our sponsors for making all these debates possible. We're going to start with candidates giving an opening statement. Keep it to maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Questions about issues facing Anchorage asked by me, candidate questions to one another, and then closing remarks. We drew at random, and Daniel George will start with your opening statement, and then we'll go to Daniel Volland. So Daniel George, go ahead, challenger.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with the Alaska Landmine and the opportunity to introduce myself to folks who haven't maybe met me before, although as a lifelong Alaskan, I have had the opportunity to meet a lot of folks in our community and build those relationships. Again, my name is Daniel George. I am running for the Anchorage Assembly to represent the North Anchorage District, which is the 11 community council areas in North Anchorage. Those communities are places that I've been deeply involved in the last 20 years. I've served as the president of my local community council. I have served as the chair of the Federation of Community Councils. I've also served in many other nonprofit and local government and state government, federal government roles over those years. I believe that a great city is simply a collection of great neighborhoods, which is why I've been so involved in my community, and that makes me an excellent choice for voters in District 1. I've served in state roles and federal roles, serving constituent challenges and helping deliver results for Alaskans for many years. And that's taught me to work with folks from all over the political spectrum with broad backgrounds. I've been able to save local parks through an act of Congress. I've helped to co-author a local community neighborhood plan. I've driven investment to my community by securing grants for public safety and infrastructure projects such as alley paving and pedestrian lighting and safety upgrades. I've been honored by the Alaska Legislature with citations for my work. I've also helped to craft education legislation in Juneau, which was the last major increase of the base student allocation. I've worked hard for the constituents in our area for many years in volunteer roles and professional roles, and now I ask for voter support as we try and solve many of our challenges in District 1, which is the most diverse district in the United States of America, where I'm proud to live.
Thank you, Daniel George. Daniel Volland. I'm going to call you guys by your full names because it is the Daniel. So Daniel Volland,
Yes.
Assembly member incumbent. Go ahead for your opening statement.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, I'm Daniel Volland, and I'm honored to represent North Anchorage neighborhoods on the Anchorage Assembly. A little bit about myself. I'm an optometrist and small business owner. I own a little optometry clinic downtown. And prior to that, I traveled all over Alaska to over 30 remote communities to do mobile eye care. So taking small planes, snow machines, ATVs, you name it, to get people the eye care that they need. So unlike my opponent, I did not grow up here in Anchorage. I relocated to Anchorage because for me, it was a place of professional opportunity. And I want others to be able to see Anchorage in that light. As a desirable place to put down roots, somewhere with a good quality of life, somewhere to start a family or a business, a place to choose to call home. However, folks are going to have a hard time doing that if they can't afford housing and they can't afford childcare and they don't see educational opportunities for their children. I'm clear-eyed about the fact that we face some uphill challenges: homelessness and a housing shortage, infrastructure in need of serious upgrades, vacant public safety positions, and a loss of working age population. Despite these challenges, I still have a fiercely optimistic view of our shared future. I envision an Anchorage that is welcoming and accessible to all, with safe and thriving neighborhoods, and it would be my honor to continue to fight for that and to represent District 1, North Anchorage, on the Assembly.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to start by asking about kind of fundraising and the money being raised and spent on the races this year. In 2022 and 2023, we saw huge fundraising spending as progressives on the Assembly fought to maintain their veto-proof majority against then Mayor Dave Bronson. Now with Mayor Suzanne LaFrance in power, fundraising and campaigning are much down this year compared to those 2023 and 2022 years. Of the 16 candidates running for all the seats, only 9 filed campaign finance reports and 2 more reported minimal activity. There's a lot of big issues facing Anchorage, which we're going to talk about, but are voters and the public, have they become apathetic about local government, or is this just because the Assembly and the mayor are kind of more aligned now? And I'll start with you, Daniel, on campaigning and fundraising.
Well, it's a good question. I will say that Volland for Assembly is happily accepting campaign contributions still. But I don't think it's that voters are apathetic, Jeff. I think it's that voters are a bit fatigued. We just came off of a national election. I myself did some fundraising for Kamala Harris. I think folks have given, they've rallied, they have done their part to support candidates at the state legislature and on the national level. I will say I think there's still a lot of energy going on, though, in our town when it comes to politics. A lot of folks are out there nearly every day downtown. I see folks with signs and making their voices heard.
More on the federal
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
I'll go to you, Daniel George, about kind of fundraising and just used to be, those big races in 2022 and 2023, a lot of money was being spent. And it's your first time running, I think, for Assembly, right, or for anything?
This is my first time running for anything other than the Federation of Community Councils or the Mountain View Community Council. So
But you've been around politics a long time. Do you feel like it's
I have.
a little bit not as exciting or big as it was in years past?
I'll say, as someone who has, as most Alaskans, we're a small state and we've been around politics for a long time. As a first-time candidate, it's an eye-opening experience. Fundraising isn't something that I'm a professional at, and I'm proud to be supported by 97% individual Alaskans in my race. I filed at the filing deadline. In fact, I filed 5 minutes before the deadline because I was hoping that someone else might step up in this race and give voters another viable alternative. I was encouraged by a lot of folks to step into this race, unlike my opponent, who the majority of his funding has come from folks outside of Alaska and from political action committees. 97% of my funding has come from individual Alaskan donors, and I was able to raise nearly as much as my opponent from folks here in Alaska. And so I think that shows a broad level of support within the district and within the state. Overall, I can't really speak to the immunity level of fundraising. I think that we would have both more fundraising and more participation if our elections coincided with other elections as well.
Like in the fall?
I think that we have a challenge with district turnout. When my opponent ran in 2022, there was a 12.8% turnout in District 1. I don't think that's healthy for a representative form of government, and I think that we need to re-examine how do we increase that turnout. We saw the national elections where in November, I think some districts in South Anchorage had 72% turnout. That's how you have participation.
And you're running for the open, the newly created seat, so it's kind of a new special election. And also, I'll let you address that, also the fundraising, and then if you want to talk about kind of moving the election. It's been talked about for many decades. Do we go to the fall? Some people argue there's so much noise, it's harder to get, but there's a higher turnout. A lot of the Matsu Valley and other parts of Alaska do it in October. We're kind of in April still, it's harder to knock on doors. So maybe talk about moving the election possibly, and then about comments about your fundraising, so if you want to address that.
I guess I feel honored to be endorsed by several different groups. And a lot of those groups represent our municipal employees or people who are hardworking members of our community. The firefighters, for instance, have endorsed me. In terms of moving our elections, I don't think I'm a fan of doing that or would support that. I think we have a pretty good vote by mail system here in Anchorage. And I don't necessarily want our elections here at the local level to get lost in the shuffle of federal or state elections. In my prior election, it was a special election, and it was low turnout. And there's a saying that democracy goes to those who show up. And so I am grateful for those who did show up to vote for me and support me in my past election. It was also a confusing one, though. The timing, it was sort of a standalone assembly position in the summer. It had happened just after reapportionment, so remapping of the district. And it was happening at a time when there was a special election to replace former Congressman Young. And there was I think 50 people on the ballot for that special election. So there were some competing elections happening.
A lot going on
A lot going on, yeah.
summer. I want to kind of jump into homelessness. I want to talk about that. I'm sure you guys know I was going to ask about that. The homelessness in public camping continues to be a major problem for Anchorage. For years, a Ninth Circuit ruling made it difficult to obey camps because the ruling said Western cities needed to have shelter before they could stop people from living outside. That was Martin v. Boise. This proved difficult as police and city workers often did not know what was available, and many of the people outside refused shelter. This decision, as you both know, was overturned by the Supreme Court last June. With that decision, should we be more aggressively discouraging people from occupying and in many cases destroying our public parks, trails, and other public areas? And I'll start with you, Daniel George.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question. This is one of the central issues in our city right now, and no more so than in District 1, which has felt severe impacts from our unhoused neighbors camping in our parks, trails, and green spaces. The Grants Pass Johnson decision allows us now to have the tools that the previous administration did not have, which was the ability to abate camps, particularly when they are large and detrimental to a community. Particularly in Mountain View and Russian Jack area, we have a camp of perhaps 250 or more people that has existed for upwards of a year. We have a community that has been very patient and very compassionate and has asked for what are the solutions before asking for abatement. And at this point, we've got kids right now that are on spring break, but soon will be out in the summer, and we've got another several hundred folks that are going to be coming out of hotel rooms, and where are they going to go without a warm handoff? We have an issue where we have folks that aren't accepting the assistance that we are providing, and there comes a point where we have to recognize public safety is the foundation of local government. Everyone has the right to feel safe in their community, in their neighborhoods, in their parks, trails, and green spaces, and in their business districts. So yes, I think that we do need to, as a community, reset that expectation, because the longer that we allow the status quo to continue, the harder it's going to be to change that perspective. I have great compassion for our unhoused neighbors, and I understand that there are needs for mental health services, addiction services. There is a need for our community to provide detox and treatment. I have been on the board of Shiloh Community Housing for several years, where we provide eviction prevention, utility shutoff prevention, and housing for 18 to 24-year-old youth that are difficult to house. I understand how important it is to provide resources to keep families in housing and not become unhoused, so that we don't have to pick up the pieces and deal with the trauma when they become unhoused. But I also believe that public safety is an overwhelming priority of a local government.
All right, Daniel Volland, I'll go to you. You've been in the Assembly for 3 years, so I know it's something you've dealt with a lot, and it's being talked about often on the Assembly. So your kind of thoughts about abating versus helping. What do we do to fix this problem?
Yeah, well, I think both are necessary. I agree with a lot of what my opponent just said. Certainly, District 1, North Anchorage, the urban core, has shouldered a lot of the public safety burden that is associated with illegal camping. At the same time, people need somewhere safe to go. And the pattern of just moving folks from camp to camp, we know that doesn't work. In my first term on the Assembly, I was able to help drive some investment into housing opportunities for folks. In fact, one of my first co-sponsored appropriations that I brought forward was to help close the sale of the guest house downtown, which is extremely low income housing. And then they have a few spots for permanent supportive housing. And it's downtown. It works out very well. Rarely do I ever receive complaints about it. I think the folks are grateful to be there and have a place to live. And I think that the downtown community is grateful that it's there and that it's well operated. The Assembly funded hundreds of conversions using ARPA dollars strategically to bring on hotel conversions into housing. So we need to continue that work, the work of shelter as well. But we also do need to be able to have an adequate public safety response. I support Mayor LaFrance's work on bringing the HOPE team together. Those are teams under the police department that go into camps, that check in with folks regularly, that build a relationship, and that they can sort of assess the situation on the ground. But we do need to be able to go into our public places, make sure that they're safe for everyone, that everyone can enjoy them, and that they're clean. There's a lot of environmental degradation that can happen with the illegal camping, risk of fire, etc.
I was just I got a tip. I get a lot of tips on these. We've been covering this issue for a long time, and over on Diamond and Victor, this was 2 weeks ago, and I'm in Juneau for the session, but I was back for the weekend, and I mean just mounds and mounds of trash, which is very common, but also near the Campbell Creek, and there was kind of, we see these more permanent structures with chimney pie stoves and generators and oftentimes needles and alcohol and very close, right off Diamond, Road and near the Campbell Creek, which is close to my favorite lake in Anchorage, Campbell Lake. But I think I just hear so much from people that say, we pay taxes, property taxes, we want to go to the parks, we want to go use the trails, and I guess it just seems like for a lot of folks, the problem's not getting better. Some say it's getting worse, some say it's staying the same. But I'll go back to you, Daniel.
I'll take that lead because yes, absolutely, it has gotten worse over the last 3 years, over the last 5 years. We were very fortunate to receive federal funds from our federal partners during the pandemic, but that money seems to not be forthcoming in the near future. And so we have to figure out how to cost effectively deal with these solutions. We have to look at the sole source contracts that we give to providers and how are we spending those dollars in the most efficient and effective way. Right now we have some providers that they get paid on a per night, per bed basis, and so they want to pick the most successful clients to make sure that they house them when we're having hotel rooms provide services for some of these folks. As a result, we're not dealing with the folks that are most visibly unhoused, unsheltered individuals in our community that are the ones that I think are the biggest challenge for public safety. Because yes, folks need to be able to have confidence they can use these parks and green spaces. They're why people identify with their place. We name our neighborhoods after our parks and green spaces. Taku Campbell. Where do you live? You don't live on Dowling. You live on Jewel Lake or Sand Lake.
I tell people Dowling and Old Sewer, but it's true. It is kind of.
But you identify with your neighborhood, which is most often or most frequently identified by a park, a green space, or a water body of some kind. And if you don't feel safe going and recreating or being in those places, that really impacts your identity of where you live and why you want to live there. I've spent the last 8 years as a realtor helping people buy homes and start their futures. And a lot of those folks have been moving to the mats too. I understand the concerns and the frustrations of residents.
Daniel Volland, I'll give you the last word on the homelessness topic.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad Mr. George brought up the federal funding piece because I think that's very important. One of the things that the Anchorage Assembly has been lobbying for is a change in the federal funding formula for HUD. We've talked a lot about how there are other communities of similar size that receive a lot more federal investment. So for instance, Houston, Texas is a place that is rightfully lauded as a community that is doing really well in their homelessness response. However, the federal funds are based off of total population, not point-in-time count of homeless population. And so whereas Houston gets about $45 million a year, Anchorage, despite having a similar homeless population, only gets 10% of that. So we've been working with our federal delegation, Senator Sullivan, Senator Murkowski, to try to get that funding formula changed. We also need more support from the state. One of the realities is that our municipal coffers just are not large enough to deal with the scope of the problem that we have. And I'm very concerned. A lot of folks are housing insecure. There, but for the grace of God, go I. Anyone could have an event happen in their life, a medical problem, etc., that would potentially cause them to lose their housing. For instance, these federal employees that are being fired. Folks may I guess, be rooting for that if you support Donald Trump. I don't know, but a lot of those federal employees are our friends, our neighbors. They make up part of our community. What are those families going to do when, if they lose their jobs? Are they going to be able to remain stably housed? I think it's a real pressing issue.
Well, you mentioned housing, and that's my next question. You guys both talked about housing. So housing is a big problem in Anchorage. The average price of a home is $500,000. The average rent is around $1,400. Vacancy rates are also very low, which you both are aware of. There's been a lot of talk of streamlining zoning. You've introduced some ordinances on that and the very bureaucratic permitting process. But the housing problem continues. The Matsu Valley, on the other hand, is building a lot of homes. Something like half the houses in the state last year were built or 2 years ago were built in the Matsu Valley. And the average price of a home in the valley is $100,000, more than $100,000 less than Anchorage. Why can't we? I've been here 20 years, and it's always like we're talking about building more housing. I'll go to you, Daniel Volland. We both know this is a big problem. We all know this is a big problem.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
The NIMBYs.
Well, I don't like to use the term NIMBY because I think to some folks they see that as pejorative. I will say that.
I use it all the time.
Yes. I think some of my constituents, they really support more housing. Some of my constituents, they're invested in their neighborhoods and they're a little bit more change averse. They don't want to see their neighborhoods change overnight, so we have to bring those things into balance. There's things that the local government can effectuate, such as changes to zoning or our own code or our permitting processes, et cetera. And there's things that we can't. We can't control the cost of construction, goods, labor, et cetera. And again, not to make this entire debate about Trump, but what's going to happen to the cost of Canadian lumber if we're putting a tariff on Canada? That may make construction even more expensive. So where I have focused in my first term is how can we allow more small multifamily to be built in more neighborhoods? So duplex, triplex, fourplex. We've worked on accessory dwelling unit reform. We've worked on removing special limitations. We've amended our more high density zones like B3, that commercial mixed use zone, to allow residential development to go taller, et cetera. And so, I have been one of the most pro-housing assembly members in my first term because I realized that we are in a housing crisis and many of my peers, millennials or younger folks, are despairing of the dream of home ownership because they don't feel like they'll be able to achieve it. And what does that mean for families who want their kids to be able to come back to Anchorage after they graduate and be part of our economy and part of our community, but they can't find housing?
I've said this many times. I moved here in 2004 and I was able to find a rent. It was still kind of expensive then, but it was actually decently affordable. Mm-hmm. And then I finally bought a place in a condo, which has gone up so much in value compared to the average wage, Mm-hmm. The wages aren't going up at all this is a national problem, but especially we see this in Anchorage. I'll go to you, Daniel George, on the housing. I mean, I know you've been in real estate, but how do we fix this and stop the NIMBYs from preventing all of these changes?
Well, first I'll talk about my qualifications and ability to solve these issues because my very first job right out of high school, the day after I graduated high school here in Anchorage, I joined local builder John Hagmeyer and his labor crew. And I worked my way through college over 5 summers building homes all throughout Anchorage, including homes in District 1, the Cook Inlet homes in Mountain View, homes on North Point Bluff in Government Hill where I grew up, all over this city. And I remember the 2008 crash and coming back to work in 2009 and seeing homes from the year before still there. I understand how critically important construction is to our economy and housing overall to driving futures for our community. I know that the median resale of a home in Anchorage last year from MLS statistics was over $510,000. And I know that the condo assessments from 2 and 3 bedroom condos from the municipal assessor's office were up over 18% last year. So it's getting more expensive to own a home in Anchorage. I believe we can address this in part by looking at things like the residential exemption, which has not kept up pace with the cost of taxes on residential properties, but more so, I believe that density is one way you can solve this problem, but really just a recognition that new construction is unfortunately becoming beyond the affordable reach of most folks who need housing in Anchorage. We built right around 200 residential units in Anchorage last year. I support Mayor LaFrance's goal of 10,000 homes in 10 years. It's an ambitious goal, but I'm committed to working with her to try and get us to that point. I've seen us build before. I've literally swung a hammer to build houses here in Anchorage, and I'm committed to getting us back to that point.
Daniel, I want to go back to you and just ask about that ordinance. I think it was you and Meg Zolotel and one other had authored last year. And
The home initiative?
yeah, well, the zoning, and just the kind of, I thought the outcry from a lot of people, that I call them the NIMBYs, that showed up and were kind of freaking out. Doesn't that seem to highlight our problem when you guys tried to do something and then you scaled it back a little bit? And it was, I think most people had said, this is good, these are good things, but the very loud NIMBY crowd showed up. And how big of a problem is that? You're trying to do something and it seems like everything gets, Holton Hill is another one, years ago was, in Girdwood, people came and showed up and kind of en masse.
Yeah, I think any robust public process, you're going to have a lot of people who come out to testify in support, and you're going to have a lot of people who come out and testify opposed. The home initiative started before I joined the project. It was, I think, kind of a crazier idea. It was started by former member Kevin Cross and Meg Zolotel. We have 15 different residential zonings.
Yeah, they really went after Kevin. Hard.
Well,
he resigned.
It's a controversial issue. Shout out to Kevin. I did enjoy working with him when he was on the body. But we thought, they said, okay, we're going to take all the zoning districts for residential down to 2. And I looked at the 2040 land use plan and the 2020 comp plan, and I said, I don't know, guys, this doesn't really jive with that. The community has laid out a vision, and we need to respect that. But maybe there's a pattern. Maybe we can bring it down to 5. And so we suggested consolidation of zoning districts. We suggested some changes in the dimensional standards, in the permitted use. You know, could you have a little cafe close to a duplex neighborhood, et cetera. It went through an evolution. I brought forward that counter proposal to a working group, and they said, okay, maybe that's more workable. But then it went through the Planning and Zoning Commission process. We had multiple public hearings, and we launched our own version of a public process. We did about 25 different meetings with community councils, land use subcommittees of community councils, business groups like the Chamber and some of their subgroups. We also met with underrepresented groups like the Alaska Native Sisterhood, the Alaska Black Caucus. We did a webinar. Our legislative services team put together a whole web page, and we wanted to have all that information go out to the public so we could get that feedback. And we did get that feedback. And ultimately, we decided to move forward with the 2 most popular pieces of the proposal. We said, okay, we're not going to do the consolidation. We're not going to do the dimensional standard changes. We're not hearing support for that. What we are hearing support for is effectively eliminating single-family zoning in the Anchorage Bowl. People seem to like duplexes, and allowing multiple structures on a lot, so you could have that kind of tiny home model. And a lot of that was centered around the positive feedback that we heard about multi-generational housing. People who wanted to age in place and maybe have their kids live on the same property, or that they wanted to go to the accessory dwelling unit or the other side of the duplex, have their kids live in a different side. And so that really evolved over time, and I think was directly responsive to that public feedback that we heard.
I'm going to give Daniel George the last word here on the housing. He said a lot of things there, so I'll let you address any of those you want to.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, zoning alone is not going to help us solve our problem. I helped to co-author the Mountain View Targeted Neighborhood Plan, which has been in code since 2017. We have R4 zoning in Mountain View, and I also spoke out in favor of increasing the ADU ordinance to go all the way up to a 7-plex, which I was grateful that the folks in the Assembly, including my opponent
Accessory
at the time,
dwelling units,
the
right?
AD units, yeah, so the original proposal for ADUs was only for single-family and duplex. I spoke up and testified in front of the Assembly as a private citizen prior to my service on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and said this makes sense if you go all the way up to a 7-plex with these. They saw the wisdom in that, and to their credit, they voted in favor of that, and now that's law. I believe that zoning alone will not solve this problem. Look at Mountain View. I can drive you through and I can show you in communities where we have R4 zoning in Anchorage, and there are vacant lots with water and sewer connections, power, it's paved roads, alleys, sidewalks. I mean, all the infrastructure you need is there, and those lots sell for $15,000 sometimes. I can show you actual sales of this. So it's not zoning alone to get us there. There's more that needs to be done. You talked about we don't have, or maybe you haven't talked about it recently, but in Anchorage, I hear often we don't have the land, and so folks go to the Mat-Su to build housing because it's cheaper and the land is more available. A lot of the land we have in Anchorage is wet, it's steep, or it's not near utilities, and I think we need to work to help unlock some of that. I've heard proposals from some folks. There's another member who's running for the Assembly in a different district who had mentioned this at the Home Builders Forum the other day. I happen to agree with it, that perhaps a bonding bank of some kind, using our municipal authority and other partners to help try and bring infrastructure into landlocked parcels that can be opened up for additional housing in Anchorage. We have the largest private landowner in Anchorage, has great tracts of land, and we need to be able to work with them to unlock
Get
some
that western end of the park strip, some condos over there. Didn't go over well with either. We're going to move on to the candidate question time. I'm going to let you guys ask each other 2 questions each. We'll start with Daniel Volland, and then you can respond. You can do a quick rebuttal, so we can kind of go for as long as you guys want on this. But we'll give you guys 2 questions each, and then there'll be a rebuttal. So Daniel Volland, you drew at random. You got the first question.
Yeah. This will be an easy one, and I think you can do it. 11 community councils you mentioned in our district. Can you name them?
Absolutely. Government Hill, South Addition, Downtown, North Star, Spenard, Midtown, Fairview, Mountain View, Russian Jack, Northeast, and a little bit of Airport Heights. And there's even a little bit of Rogers Park, but it's only the portion from the Campbell Creek up to Fairview. So technically no homes, but there's probably some unhoused folks in there.
And that was a good question and a pretty good answer.
You got it.
And they're all around
Well
my
done.
logo on my pen.
That could have got fiery. Do you want to, is there a rebuttal? I don't know if you have.
Oh, no, there's no
rebuttal.
rebuttal.
I appreciate the question. Thank you. That's
It's a fun one. We have the most community councils of every district.
Yeah, I was going to think the other ones on mine, I can't name them all, but there's less than 11. You know, there's not as many. I was former Taco Campbell Community Council president. So.
Yes,
Okay.
and also
And
your
FCC.
HOA.
And FCC.
Were you on
president
your
as well.
HOA board as well?
I'm still my
Yeah,
HOA.
that's right.
River Park, great little
Very civically
little
involved.
gem in the middle of Midtown Anchorage. I'll let you go to your first question, Daniel George.
Sure. Well, so I'll take the opportunity. So recently in some of your mailers and postings in this campaign, you have touted that I don't support education to folks, and you may or may not know that I spent years in Juneau as a legislative staffer working on legislation, and I helped put together House Bill 278 for Governor Parnell and the Alaska State House and Senate in 2014, which later became known as the Alaska Education Opportunity Act. That bill provided resources for families for technical and vocational education, and it was a $250 increase to the base student allocation. Given this knowledge, do you still stand by your attacks on me for in those mailers and my support of education? And can you speak to
I wish
that?
we had the mailers. We could put them on screen. We don't have the mailers.
Yeah, so it's a campaign. You have to be able to differentiate yourself from your opponent, so I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as an attack. I think what I pointed out is that you worked for Dunleavy's campaign, right, in 2018 as a deputy campaign treasurer. Dunleavy's the one using his veto pen to flat fund education. And so I guess it's a question for you. Is this an opportunity then for you to be able to clear the record? I think my constituents in District 1 who really value education and who are looking at middle school programs being cut, middle school sports, or who are hearing about well-loved neighborhood schools slated for closure, I think it would be helpful for them to hear you renounce Dunleavy's policies when it comes to flat funding education. Is that something you're willing to do?
May I respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sure. So I brought with me the pen that Governor Parnell signed that bill with in 2014, and it increased the base student allocation over 3 years, and 2017 being the last of those 3 years. And so when the NEA and others say that we have flat-funded education since 2017, they're talking about since when that bill took effect and ceased to increase education. It's a statewide challenge, and I have been willing to work with others to find compromises to bring education support to Alaskan families and students. And if I am in a position to help solve this issue, I will absolutely do that. I have done that in the past. Now, it's true that I did initially serve as a treasurer on Dunleavy's campaign in 2017, but I left his campaign in 2017. You might not know that. I did donate $1 to his campaign. I would be in support of increased support for families and students, charter schools, homeschools, and I believe that the Alaska legislature is grappling with this right now. And it's unfortunately becoming a question about revenue opportunities to fund those. But I have been a long-time supporter of education here in Alaska.
We could do a whole show on what's going on in Juneau right now. I've been down there since session started, and it's getting a little bit loose down there with the education. The House just passed the HB 69, but it's going to the Senate, and then there's a fight there among the legislature and then the governor. He has his own priorities too. So this is a big statewide issue happening in Juneau. You kind of already asked a second question, but I'll give you one more question, and we'll go back to after that to Daniel for his last question.
Great. So thank you for clearing that up for voters. I think that is helpful. We talked about your past support for Dunleavy. I guess another question I would have is you donated to former Mayor Dave Bronson's campaign in the 2024 mayoral runoff against now Mayor LaFrance. Why?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question, but I also would ask that since my campaign has a broad degree of support from folks all over the spectrum, and I have donated to candidates, both Democrats and Republicans in the past. I've donated to Assemblymember Anna Volland's campaign. Hannah Brawley's campaign, sorry. Anna Brawley's campaign, I've donated to Ed Wesley's campaign in the past. So it's not merely about the individual's political affiliation, it's about who I believe is right in the position. With Mr. Bronson's situation, I had worked for Congressman Young for 3 years, as you may well know. And when he passed away, there was a great amount of vitriol and attack on his professional staff at the time. And simply as a human-to-human response, he stood up for the professional staff in Congressman Young's office against folks even in the right who were openly attacking us repeatedly. You may or may not be familiar with some of those pieces that were written. I know they didn't come from the landmine, but as a gesture of appreciation for him stepping up on behalf of the staff, I did give a donation to his campaign. I felt that was a tremendous act of courage on his part, and I was grateful for it.
Okay, I'll let you respond to that, Daniel Volland, and then Daniel George, you'll have the last question.
Thank you.
If you want to respond.
You know, I guess when it comes to good government, you know, I did not see the Bronson administration embody that, and I do think that Mayor LaFrance is doing a good job with the cards that she's been dealt. It's easier to break things than it is to rebuild them, so we've got our work cut out for us. But yep, no, I appreciate the answer.
Okay, and then last question, Daniel George to Daniel Volland, and we'll move on to some more topics.
Sure, okay. We talked about the federal funding challenges we're going to be most likely facing here in the future, and our most pressing challenges, which have to deal with homelessness. Prior to your term on the Assembly, the city of Anchorage didn't spend a whole lot of city taxpayer dollars on homelessness issues, and since you sat on the body, approximately, I believe, $5.5 million has been spent towards the Anchorage Coalition in homelessness. I think $2.5 million or maybe more has been sole source contracts, which the organization is headed by the vice chair of the Assembly. Do you think that money has been wisely spent? And can you help us account for how that money is being spent? And is that the best way to going forward to continue that kind of investment specifically? Or should we look at maybe diversifying how we spend those monies?
You know, I will say I think the coalition does good work, especially in terms of outreach teams going into camps and connecting people with resources. I will say I think the situation would be, I think we'd be far worse off if we did not make the investments that we've made. It is true that prior to 2018, the municipality spent very little on shelter, and it was mostly left to private nonprofits. However, I think the situation that we're seeing play out on our street would not be any better if we were to stop making that investment. I think it would only grow worse. You know, I guess I will also point back to the prior question. I feel like we were set back 3 years in time by the Bronson administration. You know, we had in place the pieces for a shelter at the former Alaska Club building. He chose not to implement that. We lost earnest money on it. The Golden Lion, he resisted using that as a treatment center. Through the work of the Assembly, now it is being used as affordable housing. And then we had 3 years consumed by this conversation of a 1,000-bed mega shelter made out of a giant tent, right? $20 million. A financial boondoggle, if ever there was one. So again, just thinking about careful investments and good government. You know, I think in our district, we've seen that large-scale shelter does not work well. We saw that when folks were at the Sullivan Arena, nearly 500 people at one point, and all of the problems that spilled out into the neighborhood. And my email inbox as an Assembly member was full. There was something new happening every day. So we've got to be really strategic about our investments, but I think we need to continue the work of bringing shelter online, bringing housing online, sending outreach teams out, getting people the behavioral health resources that they need.
I'll let you respond to that, Daniel George, if you'd like, and then we'll move on to the next question or next topic.
Sure, I absolutely support more housing and shelter options. I support wraparound mental health services and other services. I think that we need to set the table larger when it comes to solving these challenges, and I think these are statewide and regional challenges. I think that the Anchorage taxpayer alone shouldn't be the ones on the hook for this. I think that this is a statewide issue, but we also need to have communities of faith at the table. We need to have our tribal health organizations and our Native partners at the table as well, helping us solve this, because Anchorage is where these challenges manifest. And it's important that we have the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority at the table as well. They have a checkbook, and I think that our governor and our legislature
They have a lot of land, too.
Well, they have land, and they have a specific. They have
Not for use for people, but just they have a lot of land that is worth a lot of money.
And but they could give it to us to help operate or provide a service or a shelter. And they also, these folks that we're talking about, by and large, have addictions, and by definition, they are beneficiaries of the Alaska Mental Health Trust. And so I think there is an obligation for them to participate in solving this problem.
I want to move on to talk about flowing very well. It's almost like you guys have seen everything's flowing very well here. I want to talk about the sales tax, which has been discussed for the last not quite year. There was kind of a proposition by some in the Assembly to do a 3% sales tax, and that was voted, I think, 7-5 to be pushed out into the future and not be on this ballot. Daniel Volland, you wrote an op-ed recently saying you don't believe it's time for the sales tax. Property taxes in Anchorage remain much higher than the national average. And we talked about this before. It's not looking like Anchorage is going to be getting a ton of help from the state or the feds anytime soon. You know, you've said you really don't think it's time for the sales tax, but if we don't do that, is this just something the property owners and indirectly renters are going to have to continue to burden? And also the visitors who come in from you know, out of the tourists in the summer, and then a lot of the folks in Mat-Su Valley come in here and work and shop and do things. So
Yeah.
I know it's things have been talked about a lot when they were talking about it on the Assembly, the sales tax.
Well, renters would still be burdened by the sales tax, and I think that's part of the whole problem is, you know, not only do I not think it's the time, which I wrote about that in that op-ed because of all the uncertainty that we're seeing from the stuff that's going on at a federal level, but I think also this particular proposal is not the best model. And it really is the property tax offset piece that's proposed. So property owners would get relief. Renters probably wouldn't, unless their landlords were feeling generous and wanted to pass those savings on. I think that's unlikely. And so when this was proposed, you know, the Assembly member, we are 12 independent minds, all very opinionated and strong-willed, kind of like 12 chefs in a kitchen. But if you don't hop into the food prep line, you don't control those ingredients. You don't get a say over the final meal that's prepared. So Assembly members, we tried to work with the proposal that came forward. There was 1.5 different versions that came forward, one of which was a version that I brought forward. In the end, I didn't see a compromise able to be reached that would make this model for a sales tax less regressive. When we talk about that property tax piece and this sales tax proposal, it was not just your average Joe homeowner that would get that kickback essentially. It was also large commercial property owners. Upwards of 30% are out-of-state owned. So the conversation around capturing revenue from folks who don't live in Anchorage, tourists, neighboring communities, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to send so much of that money right back outside. So I think the current proposal, there are several flaws with it. I'm not going to be in support. We're going to be having our final public hearing, our 5th public hearing on that, in addition to 2 town halls. That will be on Tuesday, the 18th.
Daniel George, 3% sales tax. Do you support, not support?
Well,
Why or why not?
first and foremost, I want to express my appreciation for members Sultan Rivera for all the work they put into this. This is not an easy thing as an elected official to propose a revenue measure,
I
particularly
think
one this broad.
AEDC, last Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, they came out initially kind of supporting this or suggesting this, right, last year?
They've branded it as Project Anchorage, and they've done a lot of groundwork. And so I also have a lot of respect for Jenna and the folks at AEDC, and they've really done a tremendous amount of work in this. And I think they've done outreach in the business community. But you know, our job, whoever is successful here, is to be the voice for all folks in District 1. And we have a tremendously diverse district. It's a great opportunity and a privilege to represent all of these communities. And we are also a largely rental district in many areas. And I'm glad that my opponent saw the light and withdrew his own version of the sales tax that he had proposed. I have not been a supporter of this sales tax from the beginning. I respect our charter, which requires a 60% threshold for passage of any such revenue measure. It's spelled out in our Bill of Rights. And I am also someone who respects our tax cap. I think that government should be accountable, transparent, efficient, and responsive. And so we need to make sure that we're doing the best that we can with the funds we have right now. We need to focus on our critical infrastructure and maintaining that infrastructure before we build new things that don't necessarily benefit the folks in our area. I love Girdwood. It's part of our municipality. And I even spent a little bit of my youth growing up there. But I don't think that renters in Mountain View and Fairview and Russian Jack and Northeast who rent need to pay sales tax for an arts district in Girdwood. I don't find the equity in that.
Sounds like we agree on the no sales tax.
Can I just highlight one nuance? So the version that I brought forward sought to do exactly that, to deprioritize these sort of recreational capital projects, these amenities, and instead try to do more dedicated government spending toward the essentials that we need. So what I would have liked to see is using a portion of the revenues for a housing trust fund where the municipality could put in utilities where they don't exist, or public-private partnerships for office to residential conversions, doing the off-site improvements to help a development go in, et cetera. Or I would have liked to see support for public transit or snow removal. And so that's another issue that I had with the proposal all along is, what are we trying to accomplish here?
Okay, I want to move on. You both probably knew I was going to ask about the Knik Arm Bridge or tunnel, which some have suggested recently, the DOT. It would not only provide another way out of Anchorage, but it would alleviate housing by opening up housing on the other side, Point McKenzie and the Matsu Valley, where we talked about they're building more houses. It would also take pressure off the Glen Highway corridor, with the trucks leaving the port going north. Instead of having to go all the way around, they could go straight to the Parks Highway. Without getting into a big debate on this, just curious, I'll start with you, Daniel George, do you support, in theory, the building of the Knik Arm Bridge or tunnel?
Yeah, this is a tough one, but ultimately, at the end of the day, my job is to represent the voice and be the voice for my district, and my district does not support this, unfortunately. So
Government Hill is where it would, in the original.
Government Hill, but the
come out.
proposal would also cut through Mountain View, and it would cut through some of downtown. And we've talked about in our communities about the current, the new iteration of the highway to highway, the PEL for the Fairview reconnecting. And I think we have to respect the voices of these neighborhoods when it comes to these major infrastructure projects and the long-term impacts on these communities. I grew up on Cedar Street in Government Hill. It's where my heart is. I remember the old bumper stickers were high on Government Hill. And I have to respect the community's wishes, and that is how they feel about this. So it's my job to be their voice and to fight as they wish.
Daniel Volland, I think I know the answer to this. Do you want to get that Knik Arm Bridge or tunnel put in?
So it's
I
not,
do. I'm a big
yeah, I know
supporter.
you are. You're a fan. We
Big
talked
fan.
about it. So it's not a tough answer for me at all. No, I do not support
I
it.
knew you were going to say that.
And
I thought maybe I changed it.
it's actually been unfortunate to see what the uncertainty surrounding that project has done to the neighborhood of Government Hill, including them losing their convenience store and several other things. But I do have to echo what my opponent said. If we want to build a tunnel, we can do it. Let's do it in Fairview. Let's reconnect. Let's do the cut and cover. Governor, if you're watching, if you're listening, and you want a vanity project and you want to program it in the STIP,
I think he's in Boston. I think he's in Boston. Right?
Let's do the cut and cover in Fairview. That can be our huge, mega $1 million project.
Okay, so we're sales tax and Knik Arm tunnel. You guys, not me. We're
But not a zip line.
Yeah, well, zip line would be fun.
We can talk about it.
That'd be kind of fun. I want to move on to a little more serious topic. There's been several police shootings in the news this year and last. Many of these shootings have been in response to people either shooting at police or not dropping weapons they refuse to drop. There's been calls by some for increased civilian oversight, while others say the constant scrutiny of the police make them afraid to do their jobs. There remains a lot of vacancies in the Anchorage Police Department. Is too much second guessing of police, contributing to these recruitment problems, or are there other things happening? I'll start with you, Daniel Volland.
Yeah, I don't know about too much second guessing. I will say that Anchorage residents, they do deserve, in every level of government, transparency and accountability. For instance, that's why I co-sponsored having the municipal online checkbook, so folks can see financial transactions that move through the municipality. I think a lot of folks were frustrated to see a rollout of body-worn cameras and associated policy, to see that take longer than they expected.
It took years longer than it. I was doing debates 3 and 4 years ago. We asked about after the voters approved it. It took several years to get.
And there's challenges to onboarding all of that and implementing the software. I do think that we have a terrific new chief of police. Chief Case, I think, is doing a good job, and I know that he's working with the mayor closely to help ensure best practices. They brought in a third party to review some of the use of force policy, et cetera. I know that he's open to doing new training on de-escalation. So I'm glad that those efforts are underway. I have supported exploring having a community conversation around maybe not civilian oversight, but some type of independent civilian review board where people can essentially lodge a complaint or a concern, and then that independent board can review it and make recommendations.
Daniel George, on the kind of civilian oversight versus second-guessing police and also the recruitment challenges.
Well, we need to, first of all, recognize that we have fewer sworn officers than most cities our size. We have a per capita ratio challenge here in Anchorage. And, uniquely in Alaska, we have taken responsibility for our public safety powers. You look at our neighbors to the north in the Mat-Su, and they subsidize their public safety by not assuming those powers and having the state troopers provide those powers. The state troopers were able to get body-worn cameras in operation long before Anchorage Police Department was able to successfully do so. I was one who was also very frustrated at how long that process took, but I wasn't on the inside, and so I'm not going to throw stones and place the blame. But I will say, as someone on the outside and who voted in favor of those funds and that policy, we expected to see that implemented sooner. I understand there are challenges with collective bargaining, and if I am elected and chosen by voters, I will be subject to working within the collective bargaining process to respect our public safety employees, to make sure that we provide them the respect and the contractual mutual relationship that they are entitled to under our union processes. However, with that said, I think that we have some areas we can make improvement. We used to have a civilian board here in Anchorage, and I don't know why it didn't succeed. I think there are model organizations around the United States that can provide us with some input about how we can have some civilian oversight of our law enforcement. There was a couple of marches recently on behalf of families who didn't receive information timely. And I think that's a really emotional issue, and without all the information, it's really tough to comment on those. But I will say that after several years of not receiving footage or having to pay for the footage for an officer-involved shooting, having it edited, I think those are challenges. I think there's a compelling public safety interest where we have to make a leadership call and say it's not appropriate to charge a family thousands of dollars to receive footage of an officer-involved shooting where they lost a loved one. I think it's a compelling public interest. We have to provide it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Daniel, do you want to say anything else on that? Do you want to move on to the next topic?
Nope, we can move on.
Okay. I want to talk about Cook Inlet, the gas crisis, which we're all very aware of, where the state's teeing up to NSTAR and other entities are teeing up to import LNG, liquefied natural gas, which I think is insane. It's like Hawaii importing pineapples to be doing it here in Alaska. NSTAR and Chugach bills are already on the rise and will be higher with imports. We nearly saw the energy grid fail last year when there was a really long 2-week cold snap. There's talk of a gas line, which I think all of us want, but it's still uncertain if that's ever going to happen. Is this problem something the state and federal government, is it on the state and the feds to fix, or is there any role for the city? We have 300,000 plus people. We have NSTAR, we have Chugach Electric, we have these utilities, and it's people are, I think, maybe not as aware as they should be. We are very close to having something bad happen if it gets really, really cold in Anchorage. And I'll start with, who did I go to first last time? I'll start with you, Daniel George. Cook
Sure.
Inlet gas.
Well, first and foremost, it rises to the level of public safety. So we have the Cook Inlet natural gas storage facility here in Anchorage, which is supposed to help us prevent being in these kinds of situations, but having long-term contracts for reliable and affordable energy.
Which is part of the reason there was almost a failure. It wasn't the storage itself, it was the throughput of getting the gas out. The wells kind of stalled out, and they couldn't.
We had a period where we had a cold snap and we had incredible demand. And in Alaska, there's this old saying that we don't have redundancy like they have in the lower 48. We have plan A and we have to rely on ourselves. We've been building for redundancy, and we need to develop those infrastructures. But for folks who've been here a long time Alaskans who remember the '64 quake and other disasters we have, we have a potential volcano that might go off any day here, right? We prepare for disasters all the time. And we have to realize that, yes, there may be a role for the municipality of Anchorage to participate. I don't know if that's whether through that equity participation. That's maybe a little above my pay grade at this point, but I think that this is a regional issue. This is a rail belt issue, but it is a real issue for our folks here in South Central. I don't think that we can develop enough solar, wind, and alternative energy sources in time to solve what this crisis could potentially mean for us.
We could have built Susitna-Watana a long time ago, and that would have helped a lot.
And hydro, a lot of folks attack hydro for not being renewable. I happen to be a believer in hydro.
Daniel Volland, on the Cook Inlet kind of gas crisis and what's going on with imports and costs of energy bills.
Yeah, I mean, it is troubling. on its potential impacts to families and affordability of energy cost. I don't think necessarily that the answer to that lies with the municipality. However, I do think we need to be prepared. And so I think it's something that the Office of Emergency Management really needs to take a look at and to include in their plans. We are actually surrounded by risk in Anchorage. Wildfire risk being one that I know that the fire department is very focused on right now, with all the dead spruce, not only on areas like the hillside, but also along our green belts.
You're reading my. How do you guys know where I'm going with every topic? You guys are good.
Yeah, but there are some issues that we need to make sure that we have as a community the resilience to face, and that we would have those emergency responses in place for Anchorage residents.
You mentioned the fire. I was going to ask about that. It's been a very, very dry winter. We've had almost no snow, which on some levels is good because of the snow plowing. We haven't had problems with that. But if we have another hot, I just did a podcast a few weeks ago with Don Glover. He's the wildland fire chief. And we talked about, if it's going to be a dry 2019 style summer, which we saw fire break out, and it could have spread. Luckily, it was under control. There was roads blocking it. We talked about homelessness earlier. How concerned are you about, we've already seen fires in Mountain Davis Park, several fires out there, other places have been fires. How concerned are you, and how prepared are we for if we have a dry summer with this very dry winter we've had with melt-off, runoff, and, fire danger?
Oh, well, I'm very concerned. How prepared are we? I think we are likely underprepared is just my honest assessment of the situation. I know that the administration is focused on it, OEM's focused on it, the fire department is focused on it, and so I'm glad that those conversations are happening, but I do think that we need to ramp up our efforts. Yeah.
Daniel, George, on fire danger, homelessness, dryness?
It's a serious issue, and I appreciated Cale Green recently bringing this.
Cale just did a video recently where he talked about just the amount of dead spruce trees there are from the spruce bark beetle, and just throughout the whole, it's not just it's a state land, federal land, muni land, and if there's we saw what happened in LA, a few months ago, and other fires in the country. If it goes, it could go very quickly.
We used to have significant Firewise funding that was deployed across the hillside and for the benefit of Anchorage homeowners. I don't know that we have quite the resources available to catch up in time to mitigate what is a really, truly serious risk. It is an Anchorage-wide concern. I know that District 1 more is related to the potential for an outbreak based on folks that are living in our parks and green spaces that use open fires on a regular basis to feed themselves and warm themselves.
Well, that's how the fire started in 2019 over there by Elmore, and luckily it was John Glover pointed out that it was
very fortunate that it did not get out of control.
It was surrounded by roads, and I got to say, John Glover did tell me that they're the Wildland Division. Residents can call and they can do a free kind of assessment. They come to your house and they'll tell you what you should do, what problems might exist, and it is on the residents as well for mitigation on their properties.
That's one of the difficulties, is a lot of the danger exists on private property, and so the tools of the municipality are somewhat limited in that regard. I did have the opportunity to walk a portion of the Greenbelt with Cale Green recently, and to talk about that issue. And I guess when people think of this issue, I think that they typically think of the hillside or the more rural parts of Anchorage. But again, on that Greenbelt in the urban core, or in areas like Government Hill, it's a real danger.
Well, if you've ever seen, and I've seen it, if you've ever seen a dead spruce tree catch on fire, it burns like fast.
Yep.
And we have a lot of those dead spruce trees all over Anchorage. Last topic before closing statements, I kind of touched on the lack of snow. It's on some levels really good.
Don't jinx it for us.
We haven't had.
Please,
it's snowing right now.
It is.
It's snowing very little. But luckily it's been a low snowfall year, and I think Mayor Bronson struggled with that a lot with record snowfall. I think we can be upset with the response. We can also be understanding that there was huge. 2 years ago there was 3 storms in a week. It dumped 3 feet.
He was dealt some very difficult cards in that regard.
So I guess with that in mind, are we ready for another big snowfall year?
We're getting ready. One of the things that I supported putting on the ballot was a levy to replace our fleet, our snow removal fleet over time. We have apparatuses in our fleet that are almost as old as I am. I think one machine goes back to 1986. So,
I think we're all about the same age, right? I just turned 40. So.
Nice. Yeah,
you
I'm,
top
I'm
40?
40.
A couple of years ago, yeah.
Yes.
We were all-
it was
we were all
a
top
low,
40,
it was a
yeah.
low year when I got it.
Look at that.
Low interest year.
So yeah, old equipment, constantly in need of repairs, pieces on back order when those pieces need to be replaced. And so I'm hoping that voters will see the wisdom in approving that levy so that we can invest in ourselves. And I know that we're going to be doing a naming competition too, where folks can submit their
That's going to go bad.
names for snow plows.
Guarantee you that's going to go bad.
I am sure people are going to come forward with some
Didn't they
colorful.
already put some rules in place?
There's some rules. There's no profanity.
Didn't they put some bumper
Yeah, for sure.
sideboards, no names of people? Or,
Might as well ask Reddit.
oh yeah, no, I didn't. Some of these in other places have gone off the rails.
But all that to say that is an opportunity for us to invest in ourselves and to get prepared for the next big snow year.
Daniel, George, are we ready? We saw these closures of schools, remote learning, and also the impact on commerce when the city shut down for a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, people not going to work, people not going to businesses. It's a huge cost of not being able to plow our roads and sidewalks.
Yeah, just the loss of the ability of children to go to school for days on end. That has an impact long into the future. I'm glad the Anchorage School District has transitioned their policy in regard to that. But I remember snow days growing up. I don't know if that'll be a thing going forward for folks, but I would hope that we would realize some cost savings this year, given that we haven't had to have all of the expenses associated and all the use associated with our snow equipment. I would like to know where those cost savings could potentially be realized. I know that there's still a little bit of winter left. I'm hoping that you haven't jinxed it for us. But
It is snowing, right?
but it is. Yes, there are some basic public safety services that our citizens expect. As a subarctic northern city, we have to do snow plowing well. If we can't do that well, folks aren't going to.
Well,
if you don't fill the potholes and you don't provide a good 911 response time, not a lot of the other things matter.
I grew up in New Mexico. I moved here in August of 2004, and in in Albuquerque, when it snowed an inch or two, everything shut down for the next day. School shut down, government shut down. My first storm here, I remember it was Halloween 2004, and it snowed like way over a foot. And I'm thinking, yeehaw, nothing was closed or canceled because back then everything was plowed basically immediately. So we can do this, and we should be able to, properly plow the roads.
Agreed.
I want to thank you both for coming, Daniel Volland, Assemblymember Daniel Volland, and Daniel George. We're going to go to closing statements. We're going to start with you,
Okay.
Daniel Volland. And before we start with closing statements, I again want to thank our sponsors, GCI, great internet, all kinds of phone service. Sumner Company, Jesse Sumner, providing preeminent kind of builder in the Mat-Su Valley. IBW Local 1547, they're doing great work with electricians and training electricians. Legislative consultants, Wendy Chamberlain, Heather Briggs, some lobbyists in Juneau. And Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, that's Brad Keithley. He does a weekly column on the Alaska Landmine. So I want to thank again our sponsors. I want to thank the Daniels for showing up, and we're going to end with closing statements. And I want to thank our team as well, our great team back there making this debate possible. So Daniel Volland first up for a closing statement.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity. Thank you
How'd I
for
do?
having us. Landmine, you did pretty good. We were kind of guessing your questions, but maybe change it up, make it a little more exciting next time.
You guys are the hot race, so it's kind of a fun one.
Yeah, so in closing, I'll just say that Election Day is April 1st, April Fool's Day. I don't know what that's supposed to imply, but that's the one it is. So April Fool's Day, when you fill out your ballots, don't be fooled. With this Daniel Volland, you know what you're going to get. I have a clear record, one of which I'm proud. That includes investments in early education and childcare, investments in housing and behavioral health resources, investments in infrastructure upgrades, and policies that make it easier to get around town, whether you're a pedestrian, a bicyclist, a wheelchair user, or a driver. Support for public safety, like the mobile crisis team expansion. This is the type of local government work that I'm really passionate about. If those things matter to you, too, then vote Volland by April 1st. And I would be honored to continue to represent you, North Anchorage.
Thank you, Daniel Volland, and we'll go to Daniel George for your closing statement.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. And I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the Landmine putting on this debate.
We get it right once in a while.
Thank you. Again, my name is Daniel George. I'm running to represent all of the voices of North Anchorage. As someone who had the opportunity to grow up here, I know the best parts of being a kid in Anchorage are being outdoors and enjoying our parks, trails, and green spaces. I know how valuable they are to our community and to our way of life. I believe that public safety is the foundation of local government and that a great city is simply a collection of great neighborhoods. I will fight, as I've done for the last 20 years, to support and strengthen our neighborhoods and our public safety. I have a record of doing so, and I believe I would be a tremendous asset to the voters of District 1, and I ask for your support. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Daniel Volland, Assembly Member, Incumbent, Daniel George, Challenger. Again, Nick Danger did not respond to our invitation. I want to again thank our sponsors, our team. We're going to be doing debates for all 6 races. Again, we all know ballots went out a couple days ago this week. They're due back by April 1st, so make sure to tune into our future debates here. We're going to be doing them this weekend, and some will be live, and some will, maybe they'll all be live. I'm not sure. I haven't decided, but we wanted to do this first one live to make sure everybody could see the debate and know that we're going to be doing debates for all 6 races this weekend. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned to our future debates here this weekend and on Monday. In the Alaska Landmine, one more thanks to Daniel Volland and Daniel George, District 1, North Anchorage Assembly race. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeff.